What I want to do tonight is, as you heard, I want to touch on the 40-60 principle with regards to recovery. And I'm just going to lay a basic foundation and just touch on some basic principles with regards to what recovery really is all about. And then I'm going to leave the 60-40 principle for last and then link it to the whole concept of recovery. I just want to read a definition that the American Society of Addiction Medicine has come up with what addiction is all about. Addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory and related circuitry, meaning those parts of the brain have been impaired that process reward, pleasure, motivation, memory and decision making as well. Dysfunction in these circuits lead to characteristic biological, psychological, social and spiritual manifestations. So it touches every single aspect of the individual's life. This is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing reward and or relief by substance use and other behaviors, and usually in spite of negative consequences. As I said, I'm just going to touch on a couple of principles. It's important to understand that when we talk about addiction, we're not talking about the behavior. The behavior is symptomatic of the disease of addiction. And very often people get quite frustrated when you refer to addiction as a disease. They will say things like diabetes is a disease or cancer is a disease. What makes addiction a disease? It is estimated worldwide that only around about 15 to 20% of people who experiment with drugs or alcohol become addicted. That to me speaks of some kind of inherent predisposition towards the disease, whether it could be environmental, it could be genetic, it could be the whole idea of nature versus nurture. That could sort of fit into some concept of the disease, but more importantly for me is more the damage that is done over time by what we call the drug of choice. The impairment that takes place in the brain. There's actually a change in brain function and brain structure. There's a change in bodily function and structure at a very cellular level. So just as far as that is concerned, it puts addiction in the category of disease. Apart from that, the addict also develops a separate personality, or if I can put it this way, an additional personality to who he or she really is. When we talk about personality, what we're really referring to, mentioning neuroscience, we're really referring to various neural networks that I've developed in my brain, containing my beliefs, my values, behaviors, skills, language, whatever it is, and all those various neural networks operate together, and you have John's personality. In addiction, there's what I refer to as a parasitic, chemically induced subpersonality that develops in the person's brain called the addict. And all the information about the need for the using, the factors that contributed towards using, the impact of the drug of choice, all the survival behaviors, the culture, the beliefs, everything is stored within that subpersonality. And that is what ultimately drives the behaviors that go with it. If I were to give each of you a piece of paper, and don't worry, I'm not going to do it, and I ask you to list your values and your morals, values, the things that are important to you that you live your life by, morals, your sense of right and wrong, most of you will probably come up with a fairly substantial list. The addict personality has got one value, and that is to survive. Addiction is also referred to the disease of survival. It is a constant planning and scheming to get the next fix or the next drink or whatever it is, because the addict has got to the stage where the ability to choose to use or not has gone by the wayside because of the impairment to the brain and this personality that is developed. So it's got one value, that is to survive. It's got one moral, whatever the cost. Apart from the impact of the drugs, they also develop the beliefs about what the drugs will do for them. Because the average full-blown addict will say to you they no longer derive pleasure from the using, so why do they keep using then? Because of that whole survival mechanism that kicks in, and also the subconscious belief of what the drug or the drink will give to me. And then there's the whole culture that goes with it. I don't know how many of you realize, but being a full-blown addict is actually a full-time job. It's a whole vocation. And we've got the lingo that we use in the culture, the scoring, the missioning, for many of them running away from the police, and it's quite an exciting lifestyle in a sick sort of perverted way because of all the survival that goes with it. So it's a whole sub-personality that develops. What is also important to understand is that addiction is also shame-based behavior. Many addicts started off experimenting with drugs to escape feelings of shame, guilt. Many of them went through trauma, not all of them, but many of them had very specific reasons why they explored or experimented with drugs. and then it continues the shame-based behavior in the addiction itself. All the, what we refer to as dysfunctional behavior, the lying, the stealing, the manipulating, which is part of the sub-personality that develops. The survival mechanisms, as I said, that develop, which is pure survival. Now, we don't have time to go into the whole neuroscience of survival, but basically when the nervous system kicks into survival mode, the frontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, literally shuts down. So in a weird way, when the addict starts craving, when they go into survival mode, the midbrain actually thinks it's doing the addict a favor by causing the thinking brain to shut down in order for them not to think of the consequences so that they can use. Does it make sense what I'm saying? So all that type of thing at the end of the day actually becomes wired into the person's brain. It forms part of their personality. I know some people like to use big words. It makes them sound intelligent, and I'm one of those people. There are two principles that come out of this whole behavior and this whole understanding what addiction is all about. The first one is hypofrontality, which is what I spoke about. Hypo meaning to be below a certain level. When the person goes into survival, the thinking part shuts down. For example, if you had to walk out tonight, out the door downstairs, and there's a long, thick black snake lying on the floor, how many of you are going to go up to the snake and think, is the snake dangerous, should I touch it or not? Unless you're a snake expert. But otherwise, there's going to be a message sent to the midbrain, danger. A whole lot of adrenaline and other stress chemical gets released. You go into survival mode, and there is no time to think. Hypofrontality takes place because thinking might get you bitten. There's also the whole principle of anhedonia, and I'm going to be expanding on some of these topics tomorrow for those who are able to attend. Anhedonia meaning the inability to experience pleasure. Because of the pleasure and reward centers of the addict's brain being impaired, they can no longer enjoy simple pleasures. Imagine for an addict going to early recovery the thought of never being able to use again, never being able to experience pleasure again. The belief that kicks in, the only way they could experience whatever it was that they were looking for can take place through the using. The incredible fear that they're experiencing. And then there's the habituation as well, which is literally neural pathways being wired into the brain, containing all the beliefs about why they need to use, why they can't not use, what's going to happen if they don't use, the fear of being normal again. For many of them, as I said, the pleasure level is virtually non-existent in active addiction. For many of them, the survival license just to feel normal. Am I painting a bleak enough picture? Because that's really the aim. On top of that, there are also the triggers or the cues, what we refer to in the culture as people, places, things. Places where they used to use, people used to hang out with. Certain smells, certain songs on the radio, certain sounds, flashbacks, memories that can actually cause the brain to link back to the association with the drug use. And for those of you who understand neuroscience, the body or the nervous system always responds to what's going on in the brain. So literally when there's a cue or a craving or a trigger, the body starts to prepare itself for the drug use, because it doesn't know the difference between imagining or remembering and actually using. So it goes far beyond just simply being able to stop using. It's a whole, as I say, personality and culture that develops. It really keeps the person stuck in the behavior. What I want to get to the 40-60 principle is, for most people generally, where there's people who work with addicts, particularly the loved ones of addicts or the supporters, seem to have this idea in the back of their minds that if we can create bad enough consequences for the addict, it will really motivate them to stop. If we threaten them, we're going to kick them out in the streets, or they're going to lose their jobs, or they're going to go to prison, whatever the consequences are is really going to motivate them. As we say in the classics, that's absolute BS. It is unscientific. The brain doesn't work like that. What happens is the consequences at the end of the day for most addicts just reinforces the feeling of shame. They already feel bad about what they're doing, especially those, I'm talking about those who are going into recovery obviously. But for those in active addiction, the only possible role consequences could play maybe is for them to realize how serious the problem is and they ask for help. But as far as maintaining recovery, consequences reinforces the feelings of shame and it produces stress. And stress is one of the major causes for a relapse for an addict. Because literally what happens when an addict feels excessive stress, the addict starts to remind them, that addict personality, what they can do to feel better. So is there any place for consequences for an addict? The only real place consequences may play for an addict in recovery is just the awareness, the alertness. I really need to take this seriously. I really need to, what I need to do to maintain the recovery. What we're really looking for at the end of the day is to get the addict to discover motivation for their recovery. Motivation meaning, and my definition of motivation is, doesn't matter what the situation is, it's always about what is in it for me. And if the addict can figure out what is in recovery for them, what are the benefits, what are the things they can look forward to, there's far more chance of them being able to continue their recovery. So the 40-60 principle is, yes, there is a room for consequences, but only about 40% of the equation. 60% of the equation in recovery should be what are the motivations for recovery. And from a neuroscience point of view, consequences releases stress chemicals. It creates stress within the addict, which could put them at risk of relapsing. Motivation, at the end of the day, the most important neurochemical in motivation is dopamine, the pleasure chemical, the chemical that helps me to look forward to things, to enjoy things, a novelty. So that whole change in behavior, what they can look forward to, it should be 40% consequences and 60% motivation. And unless the addict gets to that point where they've got that particular balance in place, it's not quite a balance, it leans more towards the motivation, but it's far more important for them to understand that, and also for the supporters. You're not responsible for the addict's recovery, but by your support, your encouragement, and creating more rewards for that matter, to help the addict to feel good about them, is far more motivating for recovery. Although there are no guarantees, there are far more, or let me put it this way, they're far less at risk of relapsing as opposed to just presenting consequences to them. Got so much more to say, but we're out of time.